Well, good evening, everyone. Welcome to the fifth installment of an ongoing conversation series where we are sitting in, holding presence with, and just contemplating uncertainty and maybe giving special attention to this uncertainty we find ourselves in and how it intersects with our lives, especially in terms of leadership. My guests this evening are Tracy Langland. Tracy is the principal at HB Secondary School here in London, Ontario. She has been in education for 23 years, 11 of those as a secondary school administrator. She has a master's degree in educational leadership. Patrick Rowan is a writer, speaker, and author of 6 books on a range of subjects. He lives in St. Paul, Minnesota. We did not know when speaking of uncertainty, we did not know a few weeks ago when Patrick and I were talking about being a part of this conversation that Minnesota would really be the epicenter for so much of what is shaping the world we live in right now. And Jafid Sakura is an associate professor in the Division of Child and Adolescent Psychiatry at the Schulich School of Medicine and Dentistry here at the University of Western Ontario, also in London. So here's where I'm sitting, man. If you asked me to predict what the world is going to look like in 2 weeks from now, I would have nothing to say. And then if you were to ask, like, oh, okay, well, let's think about what this world that we're living in might look like in a year from now. Like I would be, have even less to go on. So that being the given, let's stop and let's reflect on the contexts that we're in, given that situation. And Patrick, maybe just even given where you're physically located on the planet right now, can we start with you? What does uncertainty look like right now in this moment?
Oh, wow. So that's, a very kind of heavy thing to unpack. Like I was saying before we started, things here in my city right now, and for people to understand that don't have a sense of the geography, because we live in an age where, hey, folks in the US may know, Canada, maybe less so, worldwide, probably not. Minneapolis and St. Paul are right next to each other. They're called the Twin Cities. And although they are two separate independent cities, I saw something recently that said they're two cities that are separated by a river sometimes, by a park sometimes, and sometimes it's just the other side of a building. And that's how close we are. And that is true, that for the most part, the separation is along the line of the Mississippi River and what side of it you're on. But just like most borders, that comes with lots of except wins and exceptions. So just to kind of give people even more of a context, I grew up in South Minneapolis. My grandmother's house, my grandmother on my father's side, her house was only 1 block from where George Floyd was killed. The Cup Foods that he was killed in front of used to be a pharmacy. And that pharmacy used to have a soda fountain, as a lot of pharmacies did, in the back. And I would get ice cream in there regularly. Growing up between the ages of 3 and 10, my tenure in South Minneapolis, I never lived anywhere that was more than a 2-mile radius from that very spot. So not only do I have a connection just from the fact that I'm a resident of the Twin Cities, and kind of am going through and with and along with all of the uncertainty that is happening here now. But as an African American, it hits me hard. But as someone who still very much identifies that spot where he died as home, it hits me like a ton of bricks, because that could have been me. That could have been any, that could have been guys I knew, that this has been going on for that long. And I think it especially brings up in me, when I kind of think about that and uncertainty, the kind of additional uncertainty that African Americans live with and have to deal with in the United States of America. The double uncertainty of if I happen to get pulled over for speeding, immediately through my mind as a Black American, I have to think about, I could die, right? And that's uncertainty, right? So along with, and all sorts of other things, right? How is this person, going to relate to me? How am I going to get different service at this restaurant? How, like things like that, right? And always being in a state of question about what's next. That said, the truth is that on a very real level, we all live in uncertainty round the clock. The truth is, none of us know what is coming the next moment. None of us know whether we're going to be alive to see tomorrow. None of us know, what's going to happen next. Uncertainty is actually the norm. It is actually the realm in which we live and in which we operate, because none of us can see the future. All we know is what's here right now in this moment. There's no way for us to see the next. The difference is that we, from a very early age, from the time we're born, we learn how to replace uncertainty with other things. We replace uncertainty with expectation. We replace uncertainty with hopes and dreams. We replace uncertainty with lists and plans. We replace uncertainty with confidence. We replace uncertainty with a feeling of invincibility. And that's healthy, right? Because we humans, because we don't know when death is going to come, have to believe that it never will. Otherwise, what's the point, right? That it is these things that drive us. It is these things that cause us to be productive, to build things, to make things, to go to work, to go home, to have children, right? That if we don't have those things to replace uncertainty with, then what is the point of doing any of them? And so I think we need to stop looking at uncertainty as this bad, unusual thing. This thing that is suddenly like, oh my God, we've got COVID. We don't know if we're going to get sick. Who knows? Woo! As if like that's any different than any other day. The only difference is that those plans that we replace it with, we have less confidence in. Those expectations that we have, we can't necessarily plan for. We know may be dashed. Those hopes and dreams that we put in place of uncertainty, we know may never come true. And that's the difference. The difference is not the fact that we live with uncertainty. The difference is that we don't have anything right now to reliably replace it with.
I love that idea of seeing all those other kind of proxies or mechanisms that we try to fit in the whole of not knowing, that give us some sense of maybe agency or control, and we can look at those as being the steady reference points. But I mean, to your point exactly, I keep coming back to just how I don't know anything more about the future now than I did at the end of 2019. I just thought I knew more then, right? Like I was working with a whole bunch of assumptions, and I clearly did not know the future at the end of 2019, but I was, very reliant on, a lot of those placeholders. I'm wondering, Tracy or Javid, do you want to jump in?
Well, when I was listening to Patrick too, and with the topic that you kind of shared with us with respect to uncertainty, I immediately defaulted to, uncertainty is around us all the time, and we balance on levels of uncertainty with predictability. And Patrick kind of indicated that we replace uncertainty with other things. However, on some level, I feel we are responsive to uncertainty on so many levels, both personally, professionally, and obviously globally. But in terms of an optimistic or perhaps a positive spin with aspects of uncertainty, on some level, if you look at the speed in which organizations and infrastructures have been responsive to the uncertainty that we've been faced with, we would, it would be fair to say that levels of uncertainty breed innovation, creativity, connectedness. There's great things that come from uncertainty, and unfortunately in the circumstances that we're experiencing across the United States as well, there are levels of connectedness where people have not been as prone to be responsive or to view it as their moral imperative. With my professional realm at this moment, in terms of the aspects that I grapple with uncertainty, is really what is the trauma amongst our youth that we will be experiencing when we kind of welcome them back into the fold. And so that's something that we certainly are grappling with, but are mentally just trying to balance that uncertainty with what can we predict and what kind of measures can we put in place to be supportive, because that's a great unknown, is this trauma-induced culture that many are living in right now.
Just before we go on, maybe if I could just quickly introduce Ariel, who was just able to join us. Ariel is a mother, city councilor here in the City of London, community activist and passionate city builder. Ariel, I'm so glad you're able to join us this evening. Right now, just to catch you up, we're just kind of going around and just kind of positioning what uncertainty is looking like and feeling like us for us right now. So Jafid, maybe if you want to go, and then after you kind of have some initial thoughts, maybe we can, Ariel, if you want to kind of share what you're thinking, that would be great.
Hi, Ariel. Welcome. Nice to see you. I think, James, the paradox of 2020 is that many of us have been sold a lie. We've been told that there can be control and predictability and agency if you just put your head down and be a good boy or a good girl. And what we've seen now is that's not the case. The thing that we're seeing now is an awakening for many people about what it means to be vulnerable and what it means to be part of something greater where you don't matter because other people matter. But I say paradox because there are members in all of our communities who have felt this way their entire lives. And so it's just this weird, bittersweet place where part of it is, a sense of shared vulnerability and shared meaning making, but part of it is anger and frustration that it took this to see the suffering that was happening right in front of our noses for so long. So, in my work, my days are spent working with young people who are suffering with the weight of uncertainty, who are suffering with tremendous loss and grief and really intense emotions that have been amplified by this situation, but also with parents who, you know, as a parent, what more do we want for our children than for them to play without inhibition, to be without constriction? And we watch as they sacrifice and don't even know what they're sacrificing. It's a really tough time in so many ways, but it's also a roller coaster of emotion. And the ultimate truth is, I just hope we're never the same. I hope and pray we're never the same. Because if we let this come and go, and we just go back to the same lie, it's like closing our eyes again. And I hope that doesn't happen.
Javid, I just have a question. Is it a lie, or is it just some status quo normalcy that people have kind of lockstep adhered to? Because there is some truth to aspects of conformity and compliance that do create, you know, on some level, I would, you know, positive outcomes for certain people. So is it a lie? Like, have we been lied to? Is that because when I view the interpretation of a lie, I view that as very calculated, intentional, and perhaps it's a pie in the sky, but I think that people on some level are innately good and can't often see outside of their own hemisphere, their own scope of experience.
Yeah, I think you make a great point about what that word means and what some of the connotations might be of it. The reason I use the word lie is because there are many of us who can work hard and move forward and advance and feel a sense of agency and control over things that we do. Yet there are many who can work just as hard and not experience the same outcomes. So I say that because I think in many ways, meritocracy as we believe it in a society is a bit of a lie for many of us. And it's a lie that we are in complete control of our fates. So that's where I think the challenge has been, the way that society has transformed itself in the past 10 years, the amount of digital dependence that we've seen in young people, this idea that you can own yourself and own your voice can be inspiring and great. And I think that's part of what you might be alluding to, that, you know, there's a lot of great, amazing things we can do through that sense of control and predictability. But the truth is we never really were in control in the first place. So I see a lot of young people who go through this transition in their lives where they begin to realize that, especially young people that grow up in places where they haven't really known what it feels to be vulnerable. And they haven't really had to confront their imperfect selves because of how much toxic perfectionism we've seen in society. So many times I'll give talks to university and college students, and people have a real hard time with the idea of mediocrity. And yet that's something we should be celebrating, right? That imperfect self is part of what makes us human. So I think that's part of what I was speaking to, is the trends that I've seen pushing everybody towards putting productivity over well-being, and that idea of hard work equals control and certainty. Because as we've seen, we really never were in control anyways. And there are people who have had experiences of vulnerability, I think, who are appreciating that in different ways and amplifying it. But there's a lot of people I've encountered who haven't really known what it's like truly to be vulnerable. And that's why it's a moment worth leaning into and really digging deep to understand what that means and what the implications are for how we exist and the kind of people we are and the kind of society we belong to.
Hi, everyone. It's nice to see all of you guys. It's been a while. I haven't seen some of your faces, and some of you, it's the first time I'm meeting you. So hi, I'm working from home like most of you are. And if you hear a little bit of noise here and there, I can't control it. That's part of the uncertainty and part of the things that we did not plan for. So I think I really enjoyed some of the conversations that I've listened to so far. You know, Javid mentioned something really important that I'm going to highlight on. You know, not knowing and not understanding that some people have been through this uncertainty almost their whole lives. And for me, it's not the first time I find myself in a time of uncertainty. I've been there before. I have lived in a country that had curfews, that had lockdowns. This is not new for me. I think I'm coming from a place of feeling, haven't been in a situation that's similar, but that was a little bit more violent than what we're facing right now, in need of. And given everything that's happening, I apologize, my internet connection is a little bit unstable. But you know, given everything that's going on in the world right now, and especially what's happening in the Black community, in my community, it's been ongoing for a long time. And for some people, it may be new, it may be a new ride for a lot of people, but we've been on this roller coaster for a long time, and we've been calling people to join the roller coaster to stop it. And it hasn't happened. I'm especially you know, I'm recognizing that there's much more voices that are leaning in to listen to the people who have been on the roller coaster. There's a lot of work that still needs to be done, but you know, we're all still in a space of uncertainty. It's emotionally draining for ourselves, our children, our family members. It's draining to be a support system for the community when you're yourself are drained. But I've been in uncertainty before, and I think that I'm in a position where I've been a good support to my community in my leadership roles, because I have been through a lot of chaotic things for a very long time. And so if I can have a safe home, which is not something that everybody can say they can have, I thrive in being there for people and supporting people who need that foundation of someone who's grounded. So that's where I'm coming from. I think in this time, I've made a lot of points of lessons that I can take forward. It's funny because I have a son who I'm watching him, who's never lived through anything that I've lived through, and the way he's dealing with, you know, the uncertain times and understanding what's going to come in the future, and understanding that we don't all process information the same way and process times the same way. I think that as a leader in a community, I will say that it's important that we take notes of what's happening around us, especially in our homes, to be able to understand what we're going to be dealing with, and how, you know, it's not a matter of when, but if something like this happens again, how we can continue to have systems and resources to support people. So that's where I'm at. I would say that I take it one day at a time. I'm very focused on my well-being and my mental health, because you cannot help others if you can't help yourself. So I'm really, really focused on that. It's been very difficult in the last 2 weeks, given everything that's happened in the States, you know, watching people be killed in broad daylight and not be held accountable, and just watching everything erupt, you know, lots of violence, lots of uncertainty for a lot of people. But if we could all kind of focus on the human life, you know, everything kind of works together. I think the lie that Javid was talking about, from my understanding, was that we live in a capitalistic world that is very much focused on gain, that is very much focused on profit. And profit cannot exist if there are no people who can supply that profit. What we gain from the world and what we take from the world. You know, we're working 24/7. Lots of people work 12-hour shifts and are constantly tired, are unable to even care for their own people in their own homes. So this is a time where everybody has had to kind of go back to the basics, you know, be at home, take care of your family. I had a discussion with my chiropractor today who said she didn't sign up for, being a stay-home mom or housewife, which I thought was hilarious. But it's the basics, the basics of cooking meals with your family, sitting down and listening and taking care and watching. But I think the world has been uncertain for a lot of people for a long time. And it's just that North America's capitalistic world has been hit. So they feel uncertain because the capitalistic world has been hit. But to be honest, I think this is what it is to live in communities, to exist because others exist, the concept that I constantly talk about, which is the Ubuntu, and Ubuntu means I am because you are, and I think this is what's really rising up for me right now in this moment.
Well, and I'd like to speak to that, right? Because that is the sort of reconciliation that has been missing in America, especially North America in general. Heck, let's just call it the Western world in general. But especially in America, to a certain extent in Canada, they don't exist without the destruction of the native peoples, the genocide of the native peoples. They literally would not be there. And in the case of America especially, then once the land was stolen from those native peoples that then they systematically killed, it was built with the labor of Africans that they stole from their country and brought here to build it for free. That's Ubuntu. I mean, that's a different definition of it. But if to look at it literally, yes, this exists because we are. Wow, did I just unpack that? I just unpacked that, didn't I, Ariel? Yeah. So, and this is the sort of thing that we really have yet to face here. This is the sort of thing, the reconciliation that the work of reconciliation that we have not yet done, that leads and has led to a system that has been built upon those facts, a system that was built and designed from the beginning to produce a particular output. The funny thing about systems is systems reliably produce things. That's the reason you build them. The reason you build systems is to reliably produce something. If you have a toaster, it will reliably produce toast. Maybe you want a pizza. Guess what? You have a toaster. It's going to continue to reliably produce toast. Well, maybe, just maybe, we can fix the toaster. Maybe if we modify the toaster, or maybe if we add things onto the toaster, we can make pizza. Yeah, maybe you can. Probably not going to be a very good pizza. Probably going to still make toast. If you want pizza, you're going to have to get a pizza oven. You're going to have to replace the toaster. We demand pizza. That's what we do in America right now as African Americans. We're demanding pizza. and so I think that that's part of the lie that Javid was speaking of, right? Is this idea that this narrative that if you do the right things and you go to the right school and you make the right choices and you pull yourself up by your bootstraps and you do the hard work, that's going to produce a consistent result, which it does for the people the system was built by.
Yeah, James, I also think part of the challenge is everybody's coping with this in different ways. And one of the things that we all fall into when we feel like there's nothing to anchor ourselves to, or we're adrift in this choppy sea of uncertainty, is to blame. It's to point fingers. We might blame certain politicians whose names I will never say. We might blame each other. We might blame public officials. We might blame our leaders who are really struggling right now. Leaders are struggling because they're experiencing the vulnerability themselves. And their challenge is to be present and show up every day for their team. So it's exhausting for them too when they get blamed. Our natural instinct is to point the finger at a time like this. When, Brene Brown says to us that there's an inverse relationship between blame and accountability. So what we're being challenged by in this moment in time is, how do we look at ourselves in the mirror and hold ourselves accountable for where we're going to go with this? Not blame everybody, not point fingers, but really say, a day at a time, what am I going to do? How am I going to be present? How am I going to fight the urge to fix everything? And how can I just sit with these emotions and feel them so that they don't hijack me?
And I think, to a certain extent, how can I just sit and listen, right? How can I just be in silence and take in what I need to take in to be able to understand what needs to be done next, right? I think too, because like I said, we have this tendency to replace uncertainty, to replace not knowing with stuff, whatever that stuff is, but we have to fill it. There's this tendency to, like, well, we've got to take action, we've got to do something. Well, sure, but then you risk not doing, like, take the time to just simply listen, take in, understand, and kind of dwell with not knowing, dwell with not having an answer, dwell with not knowing the right way to start or the right thing to do, and invite in the opportunity to learn, right? The opportunity to discover. And I think that this is a critical moment for that right now. And not just here in St. Paul, Minnesota, but just seeing how this has sparked things around the world. It just blew my mind, just blew my mind off that they're marching for justice in Perth. You know how far away Perth, Australia is from St. Paul, Minnesota? It is the farthest major city of 100,000 people or more from St. Paul, Minnesota. It is literally the other side of the earth, 17,000 miles away. And they too want to see justice. They too want to listen, want to know what they can do, want to know what action they should take next. And that's inspiring. That's just mind-blowing to me. And this is a moment for us to take a step back, actually. Not to now necessarily. I agree. Trust me, I would love change. I would love it right now. The problem is that we don't make the right change under those conditions, right? That we actually need people to say, I don't know. I don't know what the answer is. I don't know how best to change this. I don't know how best to fix 400 years of oppression. I don't know how best to deal with these officers, right? I mean, we're still dealing with that question. They're 3 officers we don't even know how to charge. I won't get into the legal reasons for that, but that's the reason why the other 3 haven't been charged, because they can't figure out what to charge them with, because the law wasn't designed for a situation like that. And so you even have uncertainty there, right? You know, that this is a time for us, actually, once we've let our anger out, once we've let the tears flow, once we've let the punishment and justice system take its course, we need to be very comfortable with not knowing, so that we can then figure out together from a mutual place of from a mutual starting point.
I think you raise a great point about being comfortable with being uncomfortable, and how that looks like and feels like for many people. And I like how you drew reference to like the acts of solidarity taking place in areas of Australia, such as Perth. But I also think it shows that when people pick up a certain cause, there's a relatability factor to it. And what we're seeing with this, global responsiveness to what happened in the US shows that there's a relatability with diversity, oppression, the cycle of poverty, trauma, feeling ignored, injustice, and perhaps, as you said, there's that uncertainty of what do we do? We don't have all the answers, but it certainly has shone a light of the relatability that it's bigger than what happened at Minneapolis. It's a system and a structure that's very pervasive, and we've definitely felt that. And the United States has sneezed, and the rest of us will have pneumonia, which
I love that. I absolutely love that.
Good.
Well, and that's exactly it, right? Is that we using that same idea of Ubuntu, the converse of that is true. That you are because I am, right? That the especially the day-to-day struggles that I go through might be different than the day-to-day struggles that you go through, but that doesn't mean that my struggles are necessarily better than your struggles or worse than yours. We've got our own dirt to shovel, and I think that in seeing that and seeing that there really is more connection between us than there is, and more similarity between us than there is difference, that when these things spark, that's the reason we both feel pain, right? That's the reason we both can look at that video and both be outraged, right? And to say, well, my outrage is deeper than your outrage because I'm Black. Sure, I don't know, maybe, who knows, and who cares? The bottom line is that we both are outraged now, and it makes us both uncomfortable. Now what?
If I could chime in on that, I think I have a little bit of a different perspective on that than, I appreciate your contributions. I don't think it's about someone's outrage being better than someone else's outrage. I think it's about, or my struggles being better or worse than someone else's struggles. I don't think it's about that. I think it's about when we talk about uncertainty in leadership is about recognizing that we're approaching people from different, avenues and systems. And, what may be necessary for me to do in your community may be completely different from another community. So when we talk about, if I could just kind of circle back on the outrage piece, the outrage piece is important to highlight, because it's not today, it's not last week or Minnesota that's outraged the Black community. The Black community has been outraged for a long time. There's an organized system that is organized and has harmed Black lives for a long time. I'm a mom of a 10-year-old, and I do not feel safe if the system continues this way, that my child is going to be alive at 20 years old, because that's the system that's been created. And so when we talk about outrage, I need you to actually elevate your outrage to match it to mine. Because if you don't match it to mine, then how are you existing? How does the Ubuntu fall into place where we say I exist because you exist, when my child could be taken away from you and you're silent? I think that's I understand that we're you know, we need to have these very building relationship conversations, but for a long time, I find that as a Black woman, I've always had to humanize myself, to explain to people why I'm a human, by finding, you know, things that we can find in relations. You know, perhaps you are a woman, I'm a woman, and if I can convince you that I'm a woman as well, then you can start to see me as a human. Perhaps you're a mother, and I can say I'm a mother too. I have a child, he's really cute, very cute kid. And if you have cute kids and you can relate to how cute my kid is, and then we can have, you know, something in similarity. And I don't think that's how things should be. I think when we talk about you know, the system that we're in today, and we're talking about the uncertainty of it, the uncertainty has been there for a long time. It's been different levels for different people, and some people are now starting to feel it at perhaps even a little bit close to the levels of marginalized community. You know, black people and indigenous people, the way that they've lived their lives is always uncertain. Even when we talk about, you know, diversity and inclusion, and we're working on creating policies that do include, oftentimes indigenous people are left out and Black people are left out, and we don't put in place actually policies that will make sure that this diversity and inclusion is going to make sure that it is tracking and collecting data and making sure that people are actually being included. We can talk about education, we can talk about, you know, creating programs to help the youth and succeed and teach the youth how to use certain skills, but we don't provide them jobs. And when we do, it's always low paying jobs. We can send them to school. I can send my kid to school and get the highest education, and there'll still be no room for him in the system, because the system was created to leave him out. So you know, the most politely way I can say, no, our outrage are not the same, because you're literally 15 years away, like ahead of me, 20 years ahead of me. I'm still 20 years behind you. And I want you to see that this situation, this COVID-19, has created some type of you know, blockage for you. So imagine how much more it is for people who are 15 years, 20 years behind you. It's a lot. So when you start to see the uncertainty of having a world pandemic, something that shuts down the entire world, then I hope it brings people to start thinking about some of the marginalized communities that have been stuck and have been interrupted. Their history, their lives, their livelihoods has been interrupted for centuries, for generations and generations. You know, we're not starting at the same level. And so my outrage will never match anyone else's outrage. My outrage as a Black woman will not match a non-Black or non-Indigenous person's outrage. And even Indigenous people, my outrage, their outrage will not match mine, or we won't match each other's outrage, because we have different things happen in our communities. Yes, our pains are the same. Yes, the situations that we go through are the same, but you know, I'm on their land at the end of the day. And I can also talk about how I'm not on their land by choice, which is another conversation that we can get into. But I think a teaching moment for people right now is to recognize the pain that you're feeling, and the stagnation that you may have been feeling through COVID-19. Could perhaps be able to create for them. And if the system must fall down so that we can rebuild and look at different ways to amalgamate everyone's moving forward and build a newer idea of what this is looks like. now is the time. So yes, it means the people are paying attention, people are realizing. And I wonder if the uncertainty of COVID-19, the uncertainty of people's finances, the uncertainty of people's futures, that could potentially be a factor into why people are more sensitive to pay attention to, you know, us who have shouted all lives matter. And yes, all lives do matter, they do. But Black Lives Matter because Black lives are not being considered right now. You know, it's like the analogy of you're down and being on a street where everybody's screaming, but my house matters too, but your house is not burning, so we're not going to come and put the fire on your house because the fire out, because the fire is not on your house, it's on my house. So I think I appreciate what you were sharing, that our struggles are not, they are worse than most people. So I don't want to put it in a very on a light, put it on a heavy scale, because when you cannot profit, you cannot have a system without people. People need to be there, and this is where we have to go back into our humanity and see people as humans. Nobody should have to tell you that they're humans. I think we should evolve and literally evolve. I know back in the day, evolving is technology and the more gadgets you can get, but I think right now in this moment, evolving and the revolution or the evolution should be paying attention to human life, you know, being mindful of the people who are around us, being mindful of everyone, and going back to the grassroots, to the bottom of it. And it all starts with creation, it all starts with life, and every matter enough for us to want to change the system.
I hearing you speak, I just kept thinking how flipping exhausting it must be to have to defend your humanity for your entire existence. And I think part of the challenge that we see in Canada is the performative nature of Canadian allyship. I mean, April 10th, the Chief Medical Officer of Ontario said, "Oh, why on earth would we collect race-based data about COVID?" April 10th in our great nation of Canada and our great province of Ontario. How can this happen? You know, I keep seeing this performance all over social media, and it just infuriates me, because people are trying to fill their void of uncertainty and discomfort with a sense of agency by saying, "No, I'm an ally." You can't declare yourself an ally. You don't even know what ally means. So I'm really just choking on the performative nature of how many of us in Canada have addressed this. It doesn't mean it's everybody. I see a lot of humility, and it shows. I think sincerity and humility shows, but these organizations around us that systematically perpetuate inequity, that systematically silence and marginalize people of color and Black voices of dissent, who are now blacking out their profile pics. You know, give me a break. There's a lot that I'm watching right now that just makes me so sick, because it's just symptomatic, I think, of this virus of inauthenticity and fakeness that we see in society. You know, we say all the buzzwords in our organizations and our leaders about authenticity and emotional intelligence, and everybody reads the Harvard Business Review. But the truth is, there are members of our teams and our organizations who, if we actually invite them to show their authentic self every day, we will not accept them for their authentic selves. So I'd like for us to really stop pretending and start doing the work and start digging deep as communities, especially those of us who are not Black and Indigenous.
You know, if there's one thing that I have learned from my grandmother and from my mother, is that you know, the best thing you can do as a Black man is to lift the conversations of Black women. So I don't know if I have anything that I can say at all after everything Ariel just said, because she's absolutely just right. And I think she caught me in a moment where I was attempting, because that's our default, right? We try to humanize ourselves. We try to reduce, kind of like come down to a level so that it doesn't frighten away the white people, who unfortunately, due to the system, control the system and are in positions of power, and therefore we feel the need to kind of reduce and find common ground when really there's no possible ground that could be as common, right? So yeah, this is
I think we try to carry the burden years of not being humanized so that you don't come off as super intimidating or super you're not playing the race card, which we all know that's a way of silencing Black voices, because the Black card exists. Nobody's playing the race card. The race situation is here. We're not in a post-racial society yet. So, but I can fully understand what you're doing. I've done it so many times in my life. But I think for me, as I take some time to reflect and to care for myself and to be grounded, I'm amplifying my voice even more. I don't want to perform anymore. I don't want to make myself uncomfortable and carry loads of burdens on top of the burdens I carry, so that other people can smile at me, or they can like me. I think it's time that we literally allow them, and I think it should be taken as an invitation, and it should be well taken if we invite people to come and feel how uncomfortable it is to be Black in this society. So that way they can understand the burdens of the system, and most people who hold the power in the system, everybody holds the power in the system, and they can definitely begin to create meaningful change. Like Javid said, tweeting and retweeting and changing your profile is meaningless work, given that, like I said, we're 20 years behind in everything. Economic, our businesses, education-wise, we don't even begin to talk about generational wealth in the Black community, because that's not something that we don't have the headspace to talk about stuff like that. We're talking about survival. And when you're talking about survival, you're talking about, where is my next meal going to come from? Do I have Wi-Fi to continue to do my homework? Do I have money to afford a computer for my child so he can get the education that I'm really pushing him to get? And once they get the education, now they have to go to work and extra hours, burning their bodies so that they can pay back some of the debts that they've taken. So I want to invite people, rightfully so, to take part of my uncomfortableness, because mine lasts from the moment I leave my house to the moment I come home, and from January to December. So we can talk about that in every single space that we're found, how uncomfortable it can be, and when you're in a space where people do not understand you, and people see you as a threat, and people see you as something that could be threatening, when you're not part of the system, basically. So it's not to make anyone uncomfortable, James, or anyone who will be watching this. It's to invite you to sit at the table of uncomfortableness, so you can be mindful of your actions and of the system in which you take part on a regular basis. And you know what? It's very healing to have these conversations. It is exhausting to do the education, but it's also healing for me to speak my truth, for me to tell you, you need to sit with me in my uncomfortableness and be uncomfortable with me, because I'm uncomfortable all the time. And it's healing to me to tell you that your silence is very violent to my existence. And it's healing for me to finally say, yes, Black lives do matter, and not worry that my friends are going to get offended that I said Black lives matter, not all lives matter. So I think it's a moment to allow people to breathe, I can't breathe is not just the people who are being killed. It's literally the entire community cannot breathe.
When it comes to the pandemic, when it comes to COVID-19, I haven't checked. I don't know what the numbers are in Canada, but I can only assume that they're very much similar to the United States. This is disproportionately affecting our communities at a far greater level and number than it is non-white or white communities. It is affecting non-white communities, and specifically African-American communities here at a much higher level. So you're already dealing with the day-to-day uncertainty and uncomfortability with just being Black in America. Now you've got a pandemic that is that has in an effort to respond to it, shattered the economy, which disproportionately affected Black communities. And then on top of that, they are at a much higher rate of susceptibility and death to the pandemic. The uncertainty that Black Americans, Black men especially, Black men over 52, from a COVID perspective, is just absolutely daunting, right? Yet we're still out there marching. We're wearing our masks, most of us. We're still out there fighting and demanding. We're still out there making our voices heard in the face of likely death, and not just from the unbelievably violent police forces and the pretty much free reign they've been given in these past few days to do anything they want to stop the riots, or whatever they're calling it these days. But we're at such risk pandemic wise. On top of that's how important this is. That's how much, that's the level of risk that we are willing to take, right? And that's the sort of uncertainty on top of the other daily uncertainty that we are dealing with, that it's a whole different level, economically, medically, just a whole completely different level than what people of color are dealing with.
As we've gone through this series, and as we go through these conversations, it's fascinating to me how each one kind of coalesces around kind of a crucible. So I thought maybe because it's getting late, we probably should think about ways of bringing this together. So what I'd like to do is to invite you to maybe describe what you're taking away from this conversation with a word and a little bit of follow-up. So I'll demonstrate. I'll go first. What I'm taking away from this conversation is the word discomfort, and the idea that when you're willing to go into the uncertainty of someone else, that has to be an act of discomfort. And if anything, what the pandemic has shown us in some respect is that being cognizant of uncertainty is uncomfortable, period, for everyone. Like realizing the extent to which you can't see the future, and realizing that the placeholders for security that Patrick talked about at the beginning are simply that they're placeholders and not real. But that willingness and desire to dive headlong into the discomfort in the pursuit of understanding, not in a comprehensive way, not that I fully understand what it's like to be another person, not that I can have the reactions to the things that anyone else has experienced in life, But I guess in the spirit of Ubuntu, to realize how much of my life is a part of your life, and to go into that uncertainty with you. So the desire for discomfort, because if I'm not uncomfortable, I'm not going there with you. That's what I'm taking away from this dialogue. So that was a really long description I gave to my word. So I guess I've opened the floodgates that if you need 3 paragraphs to ramble through why you chose the word, I guess you can take it.
I think what I take away from this is that there's room for healing when we have these conversations. There's room to walk away feeling light. I've had a very long day, you know. I've had a very long and burdensome and busy and, you know, emotionally draining, and had to do my job at the same time and continue to be, you know, the community leader that everybody wants me to be and needs me to be. It's a lot in the time where you just need air to breathe. And I can, you know, gladly say that I am leaving this call feeling light, feeling heard. I did say my truth without holding back, which is not very, something that's very often for politicians, where you can openly say how you feel inside without fearing some sort of backlash, especially when you're a politician of color or a young woman. So I'm taking away lightness and continued journey with everybody. And yeah, I'm empowering myself to be me and to take up my space and to continue to understand that I have a space too, and I have there's space for me at the table, and I can claim it. Whether it will come to me right away or not, I will continue to claim it. So yeah.
I'll just go quickly because I really have to go. So I'm sorry, but I think the word listening for me, because we talk about listening all the time, but we don't really talk about making sure that we're truly hearing both what's being said and what's not being said. So I think it was such a gift for me to listen to some of what everybody shared. And I hope that we as a society, regardless of this roller coaster we're on, take more time to truly listen to each other, not just listen to respond, but to listen to everything deeply that's going on. So, and I'm sorry I have to go. Bye.
Thank you, Jaffe. Thanks for being part of this.
I'll go really quickly. Interestingly, when James reached out to me previously, it was about, you know, leading in uncertainty, and we were talking about COVID-19, so there was somewhat of a lack of preparation in terms of the topics that we were discussing. But for somebody who spends a huge part of my day, my life, and my craft is dealing with marginalized youth. And I too, not to kind of be the copier, but I think the biggest role I play is that to listen as well, and to reevaluate and to let marinate the systems that we do have. I deal with a very large Indigenous population. I deal with a very large refugee population, extensive poverty, family violence, family trauma. And, you know, I'm a white woman, and it's, in some sense, I feel your pain too, because it's just being able to be vulnerable myself in terms of we're open, we're here, and we're listening. And it's for myself, it's just patience, and patience to be trusted, and just to not give up. And it's so important, and I really appreciate your vulnerability, Ariel, and you Patrick as well, just being in the heart of everything in your own life experiences, and being so open and sharing, because I know that this is so raw for you.
I guess that just leaves me, huh? Oh God, one word, I can't. 3 possibly. Reckoning. This is a reckoning. This is a reckoning for all human beings. This is a reckoning of who we really are, what we've really done, the systems we've built, the destruction that we've done. This is a reckoning. Reconciliation. We need a process for that, because otherwise the reckoning is for naught. And rebuilding. Once we have come to a true reckoning, an honest reckoning, and we've gone through a process of reconciliation, only then can we rebuild all of this that needs to be destroyed, and rebuild it for something better. Yeah, I think that's it. 3.
Well, thank you so much to all of you for jumping in and being willing to, I think I said to the people in the last conversation or 2 conversations before that, I count myself so fortunate to have, people like you in my life that I can say, hey, let's have a conversation about everything we don't know about the future and see where it goes, and and go there honestly and see where it takes us. So I'm very thankful and indebted to all 4 of you for saying yes, let's have it. So thank you very much. We'll be doing one more conversation in this series. It will be tomorrow at noon Eastern time. So if you're interested in catching that, please do feel free to join in. Thank you so much to Javid, who had to run for a meeting, and to Patrick, and to Tracy, and to Ariel. Thank you so much for being a part of this. I really appreciate it.
Very nice to meet all of you guys, and thanks for this very enriching conversation.
Thank you. Nice meeting everybody.
Yep.
Enjoy the rest of your week.
Same. Take care.